Like cooking, everything has a recipe.
A set of instructions to follow in order to gain a certain result.
Music is no different.
Be it ingredients for a dish, a set list for an amazing show,
Or a release strategy for a successful launch.
these are all recipes.
Hi, we're your hosts, Sean.
And I'm Brandon.
Come and join us in our kitchen as we go through the Music Maker's Cookbook.
Let's get cooking.
Welcome to the Music Maker's Cookbook, the podcast that helps independent artists cook up recipes for success in the music industry. I'm Sean.
I'm Brandon.
And today we've got another great episode for you. I say it every episode because I always believe we're going to have a good one. Today's going to be all about setting boundaries.
You're just manifesting a great episode. I just
Exactly.
want to say that real quick. Yeah. But we're going to be talking about boundaries today.
Yes, we are.
Like Sean just said and alluded to. Boundaries are a great topic to talk about because as a musician, creative artist, we're not good at setting boundaries. I know I wasn't. I'm better now. I wouldn't say I'm great at it, but I'm better now. What about you, Sean? What's your experience?
Yeah, I'm still not great, but I'm getting better.
Yeah.
And we're just jumping into it today, apparently.
I guess so. Yeah, we're gunning. We're gunning. We've, full disclosure, I've had 2 cups of coffee. Sean has only had one. But we're kind of jittery today.
Yeah. So we're ready to go.
Yeah.
Go.
No, it's an art. It's a practice. Yeah. You have to practice setting boundaries and enforcing them and coming up with creative ways to maybe enforce them, right? Or detail.
Well, let's be real. A lot, like one of the hardest things to say can be no in a lot of situations, especially when art's involved.
Right.
You want to do it. You want to play shows. You want to make music. You want to. That's what we want to do.
Yeah.
So if someone offers you a gig and it's not the right gig, it's hard to say no. It's like this doesn't align with what I'm doing.
Yeah. It's really tough because there's a lot of emotion behind the word no, right? Because then we think like maybe scarcity mindset, right? Oh, opportunity is never going to come back. We're never going to get that opportunity again, right? Or I'm going to make this person really upset and they're not going to like me anymore, right? It's a communal thing, I think, behind it. There's a scarcity element behind it. If you never say no, then you're going to be taken in all sorts of different directions and you're not going to be able to go anywhere that you really want to make it to, right? There's a lot of power in saying no, but learning how to do it is important because there are specific ways to do it to make it work to your advantage and not miss out on these opportunities and come across as a complete asshole, right? Yeah. Because of course you could just be like, no, I don't want to work on that. This fucking sucks. But that's going to hurt a lot of feelings along the way. And a lot of missed opportunities along the way, too. So,
for example, Brandon, do you want to completely clear your schedule the rest of the day and just record 5 episodes today?
Fuck no, Sean.
Don't gotta be that mean about it.
Not today, Sean. I actually have a lot to do. You know, we just got back from Memorial Day weekend. I just want to really catch up on some things. How about we plan it for a different day? Is that cool with you?
Yeah, it's cool. Any particular days got in mind?
Friday might work.
Cool. All right.
Perfect.
So what Brandon just did is something we're going to be talking about later on about kind of ways to politely, I guess, really, we did just kind of jump into it. So just to give you a layout of today's episode, why it's going to be an awesome episode is we talked right off the bat about the power of no and how important it is to have the distinction and those boundaries for when someone asks you to do something that doesn't align with what your goals are. But sometimes it's hard to know exactly what the goals are, whether or not it does align or not. And if someone does say something that you don't want to hurt their feelings or you care about them and you don't want to come off as rude or disrespectful by saying no, then there's certain ways you have to pivot. Yeah. And we're going to be covering all that later in the episode, how to broadly set and build and create your boundaries in general in your life and how the music relates within your life, but then also specifically on a project when you do go into a studio or start a tour or on the road and you have all these people involved, how you can set boundaries with them so that everyone follows it. They can all remain accountable. You can remain accountable and it keeps it very tight and organized well. Yeah. So that's kind of the meat and potatoes of this podcast episode today. That's what we're going to be cooking.
Yeah. And I mean, kind of piggybacking off that, I mean, without boundaries, right? I mean, people will either deliberately or inadvertently take advantage of you. I know this sounds like really bad saying it out loud, but it's not really a malicious thing most of the time, which lends itself to the inadvertency of this discussion, right? But it can be malicious too. So you have to kind of protect yourself. These boundaries are here to protect you, your time and your resources. And I want to make a clear distinction today too. We're talking about like external boundaries and not intrapersonal boundaries. Cause like this is a totally different conversation in terms of like the content, but sometimes like enforcing them, obviously it wouldn't be an external enforcement of your boundary. It'd be an intrapersonal. But like I said, we're not going to be talking about that specifically today. Maybe on a different day, we can talk about setting personal boundaries for yourself and keeping yourself kind of wrangled up and dialed in with what you need to do and not overstep a boundary that you might have.
Oh yeah, for sure.
inside yourself.
Self accountability and
Yeah.
discipline are a set of boundaries that you give yourself. As you mentioned, it's interpersonal boundaries. But oftentimes those words are, I said discipline is the key word that's being used. So that's the topic for a whole different conversation. As I mentioned, we're talking about broad boundary setting for yourself and the people around you that align with what your goals are. And then also creating and setting boundaries for any particular project that you will be on, because music's all about people and collaboration. Like, you will be working with other people at some point along your journey. Definitely guaranteed if you're looking to make a living doing this, which is what you're here for.
That's why we're here. That's
here.
why we have the podcast, you know?
As you're saying, So, if you don't set the boundaries, eventually you will, in one way, be taken advantage of, whether it be maliciously or subconsciously, by the person who is doing it. Just because there is no clear separation between what's allowed and what's not. The big boundary that's often crossed, especially in music, is the boundary of time.
Yeah.
Where
It's like usually the biggest one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because for a lot of people, especially at the start, music is something that they're trying to get off the ground, but it's not the main thing. It doesn't bring in the money to pay the rent or pay the bills.
Right.
It's, I'm going to do this on my off time to kind of, build momentum while I can. It's a strong hobby that is looking to be turned into a career. For a lot of professionals in the industry or other people in the industry, the times that you are free, that you want to now talk about your music and get your ideas flowing, may not be the times that they're able to. So hitting somebody up at 1 a.m. in the morning, like blowing up their phone, like, I've got all these ideas, I need to get in the studio now, things like that. Or shooting somebody like hundreds of texts in the morning, right before they wake up. These are boundaries that are often crossed. Yeah. This is the music industry. It is very, very lax. A lot of stuff happens at night. Yeah. That's when shows happen. That's when energy happens. That's when everyone's able to go out and express and be a part of it. But for a lot of people, it becomes like a 24/7 sort of deal. And that's where it's not malicious at all. It's subconscious, where it just becomes kind of like an overall, like, I need this and I need it now. Yeah. I want this song done. I'm going to release it in 2 days. Can I need this done now. Total procrastination, like all these sorts of things. Or we have a show coming out tonight. We need you to play tomorrow morning. I've called you a bunch of times at 11 o'clock at night. Why didn't you pick up? And sometimes this can't be helped, but the industry itself kind of is a little lacking with boundaries. So that's why it's important for us to talk about it.
I mean, you would illustrate right there is the dilemma, right? That we face, I think, as creatives, because like you said, a lot of stuff does take place at night, and especially, with shows, but not only that, but in the studio as well. Lots of studios operate 24/7. You're likely not going into the studio in the morning unless you're a union worker, right? That works for a symphony or something. A lot of the time, like, people will hit you up 8 o'clock at night. Hey, let's get in the studio. Like, I'm ready to go. And then you're there until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, right? That's the ultimate dilemma right there. And I think you have to kind of know that going into it, that is the case, and be okay with whatever you're setting, right? But at the same time, you have to also set that boundary with people. Be like, hey, if you want to work together, which I'd love to work together, I have to specifically work during these times, or I can be a little laxed on these days, right? And try to meet people in the middle. It's very convoluted. It's very convoluted because, like I said, you don't want to give up an opportunity. For sure. And some of that stuff, like you said, is a very time sensitive matter. Hey, we just got booked to play this gig tomorrow. We need these today, right? We need these tonight. We need these within the next hour, whatever those things may be, whether they're like stems for some kind of like headphone mix or whatever, or backing tracks, right?
Or even like a poster to promote the event, or social media posts to share to promote the event going on, or assets from other bands so that you can whatever it may be. Yeah. Or let's say your buddy's the one that keeps all the merchandise. Right. But he's out of town, but you booked a gig, and we want to sell shirts so we can make a little extra money from it, because this is not a great paying gig, but we want to do it. Yep. So yes, a lot of this industry is by the seams of the pants. Yeah. Yeah, it is. Just go, try this, try that. Yep. And once again, not to say this is necessarily right or wrong. And we're also approaching this from a studio and a live perspective. Exactly. So that's mainly where we can talk from. And once again, not to say that it's right or wrong, but it's important to kind of let people know, if you need to have boundaries and set expectations, that's what you need to know. If you can answer at 2 o'clock in the morning because that's your sleep schedule and you're able to just jump around and move on a whim, then you're an asset
Absolutely.
in your scene and in this community and in music. Let people know that, hey, those are my boundaries. Don't message me before 4 o'clock because, or don't call me before 4 o'clock because that's when I need to sleep so that I'm available to function all throughout the night or whatnot.
Yep.
So whatever it works out being for you, it was what it works out being for you.
Exactly. Yeah, totally agree. I mean, let's approach it as like a band maybe, right? So let's say you have like a floating bass player where you only hire them to play certain gigs, right? And you get booked to play a gig tomorrow. And then all of a sudden you're hitting them up without 24 hours of notice, right? I mean, that could be a boundary that you're overstepping with the bass player. But as a bass player, right, you have to be like, hey, I love playing in this band, right? I love getting hired by you guys to play, and I know your songs very well, but you have to give me at least 24 hours notice. You have to give me at least 36 hours notice before I can go cancel like my other job, my other gig, or call into work that night or whatever the case may be, because I need the time, right?
Yeah.
I guess that's a really like baseline. No pun intended.
Intend it.
Thank you.
Intend the pun.
I do intend it now. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you. That's a very like low hanging fruit example, right? And that can manifest itself in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah. And once again, sometimes it can't be helped, but
right.
Whenever it can, keep that in mind.
Yeah. And let's say we are the bass player.
Yeah.
Let's say we're getting tired of being hit up by this band, right? That we love to play with. We love the guys. We love it. Let's say we get tired of it because like work's pissed at us because we're calling off without 24 hours notice, right? How do we know when to set the boundaries on? Well, there's pretty much two different ways, honestly. Either it's something that sparks in you emotionally and really just grinds your gears the wrong way, right? That's probably like one of the worst cases scenario because then that leads to an emotional reaction from you.
Yep.
And that can really deter anything that you have going on with a relationship, with a project, anything involving those two things, right? That can be bad. Or you find yourself with less time, less money, and more stress, right? And once you had that realization, you're like, why is this the way that it is, right? And then you can kind of pinpoint like, oh, I'm losing time here.
Yeah.
I'm anticipating this here because I'm so conditioned to know that these guys are going to hit me up last minute and I can't do this or whatever the case may be, right? Usually it manifests itself in either of those two camps and it can do it both at the same time as well. I've definitely had both in the past, where I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I have to fucking walk away before I say something. But then I realized like this is my fault because I haven't set a boundary for this person, for that person, for this project, for that project, right? Have you found yourself in either of those two camps, Sean? And do you have any other maybe trains of thought when it's like, I need to set a boundary here?
Oh yeah, no, I completely agree with the whole thing of it's an emotional response. And that's usually like the very last straw. If it gets to that point, there's probably signs beforehand, like you mentioned.
Like symptoms.
Yeah, that have been ignored up until this point. It got brought, that's the boiling point. That's when it explodes, which we want to avoid.
Right.
That realization and it coming out in that way. But as you mentioned, less time, less money, more stress. The stress is the big one. If you're heading back from work every day, once again, like a bass player, and like these bands always hit you up last minute. And you're like, oh crap, I don't know if I'm gonna, like, I've got this thing going on with my kid, or I've got this plan with my family. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do that. Yeah, because I'm trying to make this music thing work, so it's a priority for me. It's like, well, but I've done this for so long, I'm pushing other people away. That's not good. If that's not what you want to do, it can be, that's a lot of stress. Yeah. Of not knowing what's going to happen, what's going to show up on your phone when you turn it back on. Yep. And setting boundaries can definitely really help with that. I feel like that's the big one that notifies whether or not something needs to be put in place. And a lot of times the stress can come from either expectations that exist or perceived expectations from others. Right. Because even like, once again, if it's not malicious, it can just be what you perceive as like, oh, they expect me, like, these guys are great, I love playing with them, I need to go at the show so I can help them and help myself make a career out of this. They might not think, oh yeah, we're hitting them up last minute, we're stressing them out, we're doing this. It's just how, it's like a system that has been fallen into of this is how we function. Especially if you are a sitting in or a gigging musician that doesn't necessarily belong with the band, we're not necessarily involved with all the talks of it. And even if you are involved with the band, but whoever's in charge of booking and whatnot is bad at communicating beforehand. This is just one example that we're throwing out. It happens with studio time. It happens with tours or interviews or whatever it may be on the road. Anyways, kind of tie it back.
Yeah.
I feel like stress is the largest motivator, and it's the dread of what's going to be on my phone. Am I going to be able to do this?
Exactly.
What's coming up next?
I totally agree.
And I've experienced this in the studio, and every time there's been stress, it's been a failure on my part where I haven't communicated. And this is early on in my career, where I had this one group that I was working with, and I was try to be as incredibly upfront and helpful as I could be. And the expectation was set. You got 3 revisions, and then it costs this much afterwards. Well, we did our 3 revisions, and they were all pretty big revisions, but there's only like a couple of them at the end.
Yeah.
And they hit me up and saying, hey, we really like this. We're 99.9% done. All we want is like the bass adjusted a couple milliseconds quicker because we feel like we're lagging behind a little bit. In my mind, I'm like, that's an extra revision, but it's so small, nothing else is happening.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you know what? Okay, cool. I'll do it. So I did it. And then I got a message back. Hey, we still feel like it's a little bit late. Let's go another 100 milliseconds forward. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's so small, so we're no 5
the
revisions, but I'll do it. And then got hit back. Yeah, now it's too early. Can you adjust this? It's off like that. I'm like, well, you're playing it live. This is a live take. It's not supposed to be like you didn't play it super tight.
Yeah.
So how about this? I'll quantize it to the kick. I'll beat detective it. I sent it back. I'm like, I guarantee you this is accurate.
Yep.
Hit back. We still think it's a little bit slow now. Can you bump it up 0.5? And I was like, I can bump it up 0.5, but I want you to know this is revision 7.
Yeah.
I'm going to charge you.
Yeah.
And like I didn't communicate this, that I'm just doing this for free, but this is the last one. You're going to have to be charged. And I use hardware when I mix. And it was like a 5-minute song. So every time that you ask for a revision, I'm sitting there for 20 minutes, opening the session, making the adjustment, waiting for 5 minutes for it to render, and then opening up the next session in the mastering, putting the mastering chain, waiting for 5 minutes for it to render, and then uploading it and sharing it back with you.
Yeah.
So yes, it's only been 4 revisions, but that's an hour and 20 minutes of my time.
Yep.
That, you know,
that just crept
really
up.
butting it. It just crept up, really butting my budget. And they're small things. Anyways, I brought up, you're going to have to pay for it. And then it went to shit.
Really? It really went to shit.
Yeah. Then they got mad at me.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and I did, because I didn't communicate.
I don't think that's a ridiculous thing. You know?
No, it's not. It's like, hey, we're past our revisions. You get 3 for free. It costs this much extra per additional revision.
But you said that.
But at the start of the gig, I said you get 3 for free, and then it costs any additional. But when they got their 4th and their 5th and their 6th, I didn't.
Then they expected,
Then I didn't say, I'm giving you these free revisions because they are small, but if they continue, it's going to cost something. I didn't set the expedition beforehand, which now I know better to do.
Right. And people actually appreciate that, by the way.
They do.
They really do, because it's like, oh, I'm going to be a hard ass up front. And then when they get there, it's like, oh, this isn't actually so bad. You know? Or it's like, thank you for letting me know, because I'm so tired of being taken advantage of by fill in the blank company these days, right? With the little fees that get added on and bills, like phones or something, right? People are tired of it. They just want transparency at this point. And so people actually appreciate that up front. Yeah. I found that a lot, you know, setting boundaries. I thought it used to be this scary thing, you know? It was just like,
transparency. This is what's going on.
Yeah. And it's like, I'm really just being transparent at this point. Right. And people appreciate that a lot.
And as talked about, like with my personal experience, it didn't start off malicious. It was just, oh yeah, we love everything. We just want the timing to be a little tighter.
Totally.
But because of, and necessarily, it's also because of how I work. If it was just digital, it would have taken me 5 minutes to knock out each revision. But because of the process I do it to get the sound that they wanted, that's why they wanted to work with me. It ended up taking more and more time, which once again, I didn't communicate it properly or set expectation every time we did a small revision. So when they had the assumption of, okay, cool, this is free. This final tweaking is free because I didn't mention that it was going to cost something. And then I hit them up like, hey, it's going to cost something. Yeah.
I mean, I think you illustrate a really good point, which actually takes us to our next thing that we're actually going to talk about real quick. Is like, should you ever break boundaries then? Do you think you should ever break boundaries? I wrote down what I wrote, but I want to hear your opinion on this for sure.
Like everything that we talk about, it's, you know, all these ingredients are just from a large assortment in the cabinet. Sometimes you need to pull something out, something different to make the recipe that you're cooking work. And in some situations that may be breaking a boundary to one way or another. As we talked about, it's such a fly by the seat of your pants industry that occasionally it's like, crap. He mentioned, like this bass player mentioned that we need to message him a week in advance, but our one bass player backed out and show starts in like a couple hours and we just
Yeah.
you know,
Emergency situation.
this is an emergency situation. We need to break this boundary.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's the case, whenever you are the one that is breaking a boundary that has been set by somebody else, then it's important to be incredibly upfront and apologetic with the fact that you're doing, like, acknowledge what you're doing.
Yeah. Acknowledge the boundary.
Yeah. It's like, hey, I know there's a boundary here. Like, this is the situation that I am in. I understand if you can't. If you can't, can you give us information of somebody else who can?
Yeah.
And like supply them with an out that still lies with their boundary.
Yep.
But just be forthright with, hey, I'm fucking up here.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I know I'm breaking this boundary, but I have to. This is why.
Yeah.
And this won't become a new standard.
I want to highlight something really quick. If you are the bassist listening to this, right? You are the bassist in this situation. We're taking it from the point of the band at this point. If you are the bassist and you hear, can you do this, right? And you say, no, I can't. Well, do you know anybody else that can, right? That right there is like oh no, I just said no. I just lost out on an opportunity. Now they're never going to come back to me again because I'm going to recommend somebody else. But you'd be surprised in how much value you can add just by saying, oh, I know this guy too. Contact him. He's great. And he has an open schedule most of the time, whatever the fill in the blank. He loves doing this. He could probably help you out. After that show happens, right? Sure. Maybe they have him in their back pocket too at this point, but they'll come back to you and say, dude, thank you. You saved a show because you gave us this contact, right? The opportunity is never really lost. I want to illustrate that because saying no is so powerful, so powerful. But the way that you say it and what you deliver after the no is even more powerful. That can lead to more opportunities. That legitimately could lead to more opportunities.
Oh, yeah.
So just because you're saying no as a boundary and you are the bass player at this point, doesn't mean that you're shit out of luck later on. It all depends on how you do it.
Yeah. Well, say you are worried about that. You're
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, well, they might just start using this new guy after I send him.
Yeah.
Then you can follow up by saying, awesome, I'm glad it worked out. Or, hey, I'm sorry it didn't work out. Here's my schedule for the next month or so. Are there any dates that you're gigging that you need me?
Yeah. That's great. It's a great way to do it.
Because then you're being proactive.
And you're being proactive.
Yeah.
You want to be active in a part of their musical journey.
Yep.
Lack of a better way to say, right?
Yeah. And then it lets them know, like, oh, we got another gig. Oh, well, he said he's actually free this day. And it's, a couple weeks out. So let's hit him up.
Yep.
And versus like, oh, well, we don't know if this other guy is going to work. We know this guy is going to work. He's done it with us before. He helped us out with that one show. We were thought of him because he, checked in on us.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I think that's great. Back to what we were kind of talking about. Should we ever break boundaries on my opinion? I say most of the time, no. But like you said, there's always that gray area and always the secret little spices we might need out of the spice cabinet every now and again. I think for specific situations you can, and I think it really has to do with how well you're acquainted with the person, but you have to do it with caution, right? You have to be very specific and say, hey, this is normally something I don't do, but for this time I will because we're in desperate need of this time sensitive fill in the blank, right? Definitely make sure that you mention that this is an exception and that this won't be done every time. And to help reinforce that is you can't do this often. You cannot do it often. Like if you start doing this all the time, or at least more frequently, people will be like, oh, this is a really soft boundary. And I think I could probably get them to do it at this specific time.
Well, here's a way you can kind of get around that to really emphasize that this is a one-time thing, is if somebody does hit you up last minute, you can say, cool, I'll do it, but it's going to cost you an extra amount. There's a convenience tax.
Yeah.
There's a priority tax. This is a last minute thing, so it's going to cost you extra because I need to move stuff, so I need to recoup my costs.
Absolutely.
And if they need you, and if they're willing to do it, that's such thing like, oh crap, well, we hit them up last minute and we had to pay $50 extra to get them on the ticket because of it.
Right.
Or $100 extra or whatever it may be. And that helps them. That helps solidify in their minds that this is not a thing that we can do all the time.
Right.
Because, well, they might just not be able to afford that consistently.
Yeah.
Hey, the show's not really making money to begin with. We're doing this to get our name out there. I don't want to pay an extra $50 to get him on.
Exactly.
He's already he's a good, for this bass player specific example, which I didn't think we'd be running with it this long.
Me neither.
It's a good conduit.
Yeah.
It's a good conduit. It's like, oh yeah, we like having him sit in on these shows, and he's worth the money, but we don't want to pay more than that,
right?
Because then we have to sell more merch in order to cover the cost, or we could even lose money on the show.
Yep.
So crap, we're really incentivized to adhere to the boundaries that he set.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Anything that doesn't weaken the structural integrity of the boundary, I think like just is like the really big part. Is just like you just need to be like, hey, either I charge this much, or if I'm not going to charge more for this, I'm gonna need you to know that this is like a one-time exception, and I'm not doing this again. But I mean, obviously, saying it a better way than what I just said, right? But I'm just saying it in general. But if you do need to be stern, be stern, right? So yeah, that was like kind of like my opinion on that. So that's what I had written down. So like you said, it's gray matter, as always. We're not here to solve the issue. We're just here to solve the issue. Doesn't make sense.
Redundancy is redundant. Anyways, we've talked about kind of a lot of hypotheticals on setting boundaries, the importance of saying no, when to not. I feel like now it's time to kind of dive into kind of some simple ways that you can decide, like figure out what your boundaries are, how you can define them, and put yourself in a position to better express them to people that you're working with and creating a system that they adhere to as well as that you adhere to.
Yeah.
Because it can be hard to kind of go through that process, especially if you've never really sat down and done it before. So the first thing that you need to do when you're setting your boundaries and creating your boundaries is to define what your priorities are.
Yeah.
This is both personal and professional.
Yep.
So if you are trying to make a living in music and that's an incredibly important thing with you, and that's the biggest thing you've got going on, and you're ready to work and go hard for it, then that's your biggest priority. So you can be flexible. You can show up last minute. You can do all these gigs because that is your priority. The rest of it comes behind it.
Yep.
But if you were like, man, I really need to pay my bills, work's a priority, or I have a family, my daughter and my wife or my husband or whatever are my priority, then that sits above your music. And that's how you have to structure your boundaries around it.
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of this will spill over from your personal life, right? And your personal life will often dictate, I would say, what your goals are, obviously, and rightfully so, of course, especially if you have a family that you need to provide for. So yeah, you just have to sit down and really decide what the priority is at that specific time. And priorities change. They do change, and they can change often, right?
And we cover revising at the end. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So just be aware of what your current priorities are and what you need to do. Is it a feast or famine season, right? And kind of go from there, I think.
Yeah. And to do that, it could be helpful to make a physical list of non-negotiables.
Yeah.
What is within the priority and something that you will not change about your life? Is a certain amount of hours of sleep a non-negotiable? Is going to the gym a non-negotiable? Is showing up to work and getting paid a non-negotiable? Is date night with your significant other a non-negotiable? Is making a living in music a non-negotiable?
Yeah.
Make like jamming with the band and practice, is that a non-negotiable? Where no matter what else comes up, like, hey, we have a gig opportunity, I would love you to sit in on it. Sorry, I got practice tonight. And my group is my priority right now. That's a non-negotiable. So start off by sitting down, writing all the things that align with these priorities that you will not budge.
Yep.
Or if you do budge, there better be a good reason.
Exactly. I totally agree. And I think a lot of this comes with sometimes some hurt feelings as well. People will be like, hey, do you want to go out to the bar after this or whatever? It's like, can't, gotta go home. I have to. Like, I just have to at this point, So just know that this list of priorities while you're setting these boundaries can come with saying no a lot, but for certain specific things that especially don't align with both your personal and your work life too. So moving on from there, you can create a schedule. That's probably one of the most important things. You should definitely create a schedule, like 100%. You should have a calendar that's nicely labeled, color coded. No, I'm just kidding. As long as you have something written down, but you should.
Yeah.
But as long as it's written down on a calendar, I'd be happy with that, right? Let's get you there first, right? If you're not a calendar person. Personally, I love calendars. I know you do too.
I use Google Calendar for everything that I do.
And it's free.
It's free.
That's the best part.
And you can color code it. You can create different events type of things, like all my things that are band related are orange, all my personal things are blue, all my work stuff is red.
love that.
So you can just look at it and be like, okay, I have some music stuff today. Or okay, I have all personal stuff today.
And it's very collaborative too. So, people can add to your calendar. If you want that feature, I wouldn't.
If you're in a band, you can give them access to the band calendar and they can adjust it.
Exactly. You can invite people on specific events so everybody's synced up and ready to go. So I definitely recommend Google Calendar for this, but you should definitely create a schedule because you can also put in there recurring work hours, right? Which is what we're actually going to tell you to do is put down your work hours and try to stick to them the best that you can. Of course, overtime happens, especially during periods of feast and a lot of work, right? But once you get to that point, you should reevaluate your priorities at that point, right? So each time like something ends up accumulating together or some kind of shift in the season, right, is usually a good time to be like, okay, I'm getting really busy at this point, or I'm not busy at this point. What are my priorities right now, right? If you're not busy, work is probably your priority. Trying to get more work in the door, right? If you're really busy, then you have to prioritize what is the best work for you and what is whatever it is you need outside of your work life, right?
Yeah.
So personal stuff at that time too. So you also have to allocate breaks.
Well, before we get to that, I do want to say, just to go back quickly to the calendar deal. If you are in a band and you have a shared calendar that everyone can access and you can see as a group when things are happening, like as an independent artist, I feel like it's very, very beneficial to have that system set in place where you can see what everybody has going on throughout the day. And if everyone in the band can access a calendar that is shared and see when the shows are, when events are happening, what you can also do is you can give them all access to a specific calendar you create that is tied to your non-negotiable events so that they can see, oh, he is doing this event this day. So we should not book a show this day.
Sure.
Especially not without consulting him.
Yeah.
It just allows it to be visually seen by everybody that, hey, this is a boundary.
Totally.
Just communicate, hey, if it's yellow and it's on the calendar, that means it's from my personal list of events and time slots or whatever. It's on my personal calendar that will not budge. So it's a way for you to easily communicate passively what your boundaries are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think it's a great idea. And then get into the habit of, if you're the band that's hiring the musician, get in the habit of using that calendar. Don't just hit them up and be like, are you free? Make sure you look at the calendar. That's what it's there for, right? You skip the middleman, right?
But you said like allocate time for breaks and stuff.
Yeah, got to do that because like
I just wanted to talk about the calendar before.
No, I like that. I like that a lot. What did you just say earlier? You got to live life to make art or something like that. Yeah, is that what you said? You do. You do. I remember being in the studio every single day, like years ago, all day, every day. And it was just while like a lot of work got done, it was just very uninspiring, right? Like I didn't have like a lot creatively, I think, just coming in, right? It's kind of like a creative bank account, right?
Yeah.
The more you go live life, the more experiences you have, the more emotions you feel, kind of all lead into this bank of creativity that we get. And then the studio and music is our outlet. Right. Most of the time. You
got to make deposits in the bank in order to gain interest on it.
Exactly.
Interest on the music. Interest in the music.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. That was nice.
Pun intended.
So you have to have time to go out and live life, either with your family, with friends, going on vacation, going to the grocery store, like anything, experiencing traffic. I don't know, anything.
Reading a book.
Yeah. Like literally everyday life stuff. And
walking the dog.
That's a big one for me. Taking the dogs to the park. Another big one for me, right? Schedule that in there the best that you can and try to stick to it the best that you can, because that does take priority.
Oh yeah,
that does take priority. Wellness, a holistic wellness. So,
and an easy way to do that you alluded to earlier is having included in your calendar work hours and personal hours.
Yep.
Where it's like, okay, at this time in the morning, I'm not going to look at email, look at my phone, do anything related to this music. This is the time where I do all the things that are important to me that I need to get done before I begin my day. Then when it switches over, you do the reverse. You don't, unless it's like emergencies or things going on, you don't overly concern yourself with personal things. You let people in your life, like your family, your friends, your significant others, know, hey, during this period of time, I'm working. So don't expect a response from me.
Yep.
And focus in on what you're doing. And then when that time ends, go back to whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Whether it be music related, like a music hour or another work hour for a different job or back to personal, but just kind of have some general slots that can be adjusted, moved around,
absolutely.
but some general things that can be consistently told to the people around you from here to here, this is what I'm doing. I just ask that you respect that.
Totally agree. I think you actually allude to the next point pretty well, because our next point is communicate it clearly. Communicate that clearly.
Enunciate.
Yes, enunciate. Unlike something I don't do because I'm hopped up on caffeine and I'm talking 55 miles an hour.
Unlike something I don't do. That's a double negative.
Something I don't do.
That means you do it. He communicates clearly.
Right. I don't. I don't. I can't speak, man. Especially with this much caffeine. I need water. Give me some water, Sean.
You have a water bottle.
I do.
It's literally right behind you.
I don't need it right now.
Give me water. I don't need water. Anyways, and communicating clearly is incredibly important, as we mentioned. And there's tons of ways you can do this. We brought up earlier how you can add your non-negotiables into a calendar with alongside all the other events that your band is going on, so they can passively communicate what the boundaries are. If you communicate face to face by setting, like talking to the people that you're part of, hey, from here to here, I'm busy. I can't do it from these time slots. This is part of my schedule and it's important to me. And then you also can send out reminders, text, emails to say like, hey, just a quick reminder, this is the time that I'm working. Don't bother me at this point. Also, there's got to be a program where you can set voicemail on your phone to different times of the day.
I would think so. I think corporations have that.
Yeah.
So there's got to be some kind of program out there, whether or not it's in-house or accessible to us. I'm not sure, though. I would imagine there is, though.
Yeah. Where you can be like, hey, sorry, I couldn't get to the phone right now. I'm in the studio at the moment.
Yeah.
I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Please leave a message. Or I'll be here from 8 to 10.
Totally.
Or whatever. Because like in my studio, I have a separate phone number for my studio. And it says, sorry, I couldn't get to the phone. My hours of operation are here to here. If I didn't get back to you, it's either outside my work hours or I'm probably in a session.
Yeah.
Leave a message and I'll get back to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I imagine there's got to be
that's communicating boundary.
It's very forthright too, because like somebody can always reference that, right? They can just call you and then you have someone or something, AI probably, some sort of thing, telling them that no, I'm doing this at this time, and then you have the specific hours there. Then they know. It's like, okay, well, I can't call it this time, but I can call it this time after that, right? If it's not out there, then business idea. So if anyone wants to get at us and create it with Sean.
Oh, for sure. Now, this is really where the hard part kind of comes in, though, with it. Because if you are doing this and you communicate like, hey, I'm busy these times of day, so I won't be able to respond outside of these hours, then it kind of relies to you to follow through on that. And if someone does call you at 10 o'clock and you're done at 8 o'clock, don't pick up. It can be hard not to do that, especially like, oh yeah, I'm available right now. I've got some free time. But once you start setting an expectation, once you remind them down the road of like, hey, by the way, just so you know, I'm not going to do this. Like, well, you've been answering my calls at 10 o'clock for the past 2-3 months. So what changed? Yeah. Even though technically nothing's changed, you're just now stepping in to enforce it.
I'm really good at not picking up the phone.
Yes, you are.
I'm really good at it. Really good.
I'm not.
It's my preferred way of communicating is not over the phone, because it just can take a lot of time, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of unknown, and navigating it's kind of hard too sometimes, depending on what kind of conversation it is. But yeah, if you're like me, I don't answer the phone because like I want to make it clear like I can't just answer at any time, right? I've made the mistake of answering the phone at any time before, and it just gets way out of hand,
Yeah.
And that is compounding, right? It compounds to a point where I'm like, I have to stop, right? And while it seems like I'm being mean sometimes I legitimately can't answer the phone, to be fair. Like I would say actually at least most of the time I can't, but the other half of it is like, I'm not even in the mindset to talk about what we're about to talk about, right? And I mean, a text can suffice, and then I can call you back later, right? When I have the specific time to do it. So that is my little rant about phone calls, I guess.
Hey, that's fair, man.
Yeah.
So the next thing to really go over about creating and setting your boundaries is kind of identifying where your creative spaces are. And as we talked about earlier, communicating, hey, when I'm in this room, I want to be here from 10 to 12. Don't talk to me.
Yeah.
If you have a space where this is where you make music, this is where, you let your inspiration happen. You write, you get into your flow state and you don't want to be bothered in it. One, communicate it, like we said earlier, but also protect it. Like this is the space where you do what you do, where you make your art. So treat it with respect, keep it clean, keep it structured properly, and have that. Well, that's kind of where discipline comes into case, like that self boundary, but also like saying, hey, don't come in this room. If you're not part of this experience, then don't come in here. That this is not for anything other than what I'm designing it to be for. Protect that space.
Totally. And this one's really tough. This one is really hard to do. I've had this one come up quite a bit, you know. This one also reminds me of the scene from Step Brothers when what's his face touches his drum set, right? That's clear boundary, right? And then Will Ferrell puts his nutsack on the drums, right? So I feel like I've dealt with this, not that specific situation, God forbid.
Don't record drums at Brandon because you're gonna send a slight whiff of nutsack. Apparently,
they're disinfected by now. You know, no. But yeah, this one is really tough to do because now you're also kind of training people that, hey, this is my space. Mm-hmm. Don't knock on the door. Don't walk in, right? Or have a specific way you need to communicate to me while I'm in the room. Mm-hmm. Don't move things around in the room, whatever the case may be. But this one is really tough because if you're doing it from your own house, right? You have kids, you have a wife or husband, you have dogs, you have roommates, right?
That's probably the big one.
That's a huge one. Is roommates.
If you're in a space with other people who are doing it, especially like if they're musicians too. And like it's a shared space. I'll pick up your guitar and I'll fit around with it a little bit.
Shared space doesn't always mean shared space, right? Right.
And even if it is, be like, hey, from this time to this time, it's mine, not yours.
Yep.
So having that kind of communication and setting those boundaries is incredibly important.
Yeah, totally agree. So
now you've done all this, you've come up with a list of your non-negotiables, you've set time aside where you are focusing on what's important to you, you've communicated it to your friends, your family, your bandmates, people who are working with you in this industry that this is what I can do, this is when I can do it, this is what I'm willing to do, and you've gone through the whole steps of defining, these are my boundaries, this is what I know is important to me, this is what I'm going to do. Mm-hmm. Great. Cool. Abide by it, follow through, keep it consistent.
That's great.
But that being said, still set aside time occasionally, every quarter, every half a year, bi-weekly, yearly, whatever it works out for you to reflect and adjust what your boundaries are.
Yeah.
Because where you are in your music career is going to change. Yep. Where you are in your main career, if you do have a 9-to-5, is going to change. Mm-hmm. Where you are in family relationships, personal relationships, business relationships, financially, physically, like where you live, where you function, all this is going to change. And you need to go back and reflect and adjust what is important to you, what your non-negotiables are, so that way you can better communicate to these people and set more effective boundaries moving forward from that point on.
Absolutely. And I think once you get across some of these issues that you might be having with a specific boundary or something that nips you the wrong way, right? You can make a micro adjustment on the fly, right? Mm-hmm. Be like, oh, this is good. This is one of those specific situations I'd never thought about. I'm going to implement this right away, right? Mm-hmm. So it doesn't need to be always like a holistic overview. Sometimes you can like kind of like sprinkle in here and there. But I think for the most part, though, every quarter, every top of the month, whatever you want to do, however you see fit, definitely reevaluate where you are and adjust those boundaries to where you need to go to get to the next step in your life. Mm-hmm. 100%. Totally agree. Very important to do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like a broader review of boundaries. Thank you for listening with us. If you got through all this, really appreciate it.
Yeah.
But now I really want to focus on something that I think is really important, ending it with a bang. When you're doing all this, there's a separate process you now need to take to be more professional about it, set professional boundaries with people you're working with, be it promoters, venue owners, people within your band, whatever it may be. And that's kind of what I want to real briefly talk about, how to set up and create boundaries in that regard. Yeah. The steps you need to take in order to create boundaries and communicate these boundaries in an effective manner as an independent artist are set up in writing what the boundaries are. Make sure you have it set up and communicated before the project begins. Attach consequences to what will happen if these boundaries are not followed, and then have it written down in a written agreement and have them sign it, or at least in a writing, confirm that they have read it, they agree to it. So if you are a session musician or a gigging musician, this is incredibly important to have a set of boundaries. Mm-hmm. And honestly, it's kind of like a soft contract. Where if you want me to work this gig, you have to communicate this with me 2 weeks to a month beforehand. If you don't, like this is in writing, you've shared it to them before any sort of gigs begin so that they're aware of it. It's something they can always look back upon. And then to say, if it's between 2 weeks and 1 week, then it'll be an extra $30. If it's within a week, it'll be an extra $50. And if it's the day before, it would cost an extra $75 or $100 or whatever it may be. Now you have applied a consequence to it. So if they don't strictly adhere to the boundary that you are setting, then there will be a consequence. It incentivizes them to follow through and communicate with you within the timeline that you've allotted them.
Yeah.
In this particular example that we've mentioned throughout this whole podcast episode.
Totally.
About being a gigging or session musician.
I think you make a great point because a lot of the time I feel like we're talking to groups of people or a band, right? Sometimes I feel like we are talking to the one-off person, you know, but once you start getting into a band, you're now managing multiple different expectations, multiple different boundaries at one time, right? And this can become very, very, very difficult to do. So having that open and clear communication, like we kind of discussed before too, up front with your boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Is extremely important to do because a lot of the time we've been kind of speaking like a 1-to-1 kind of relationship, 1-to-many at some point. Now it's many to many, right?
Yes.
Now it's 1-to-1 to 1 to 1 to 1. And then when you get into a studio or you get into like a venue, then it's multiple or many to many, like, you know, at that point, right? So very important to have clear expectations there. And I'm glad you left this one to the end because this one gets a lot more complex. I'm glad that we left it a little bit more simplified on the trajectory here. And now it's like, this is like the next step is managing multiple boundaries.
Yeah.
So doing everything that we've kind of discussed up to this point helps in delivering that successful end or successful boundaries, right? Later on with multiple people. And as long as everybody can understand that and come together and communicate effectively, you should have no problem in managing multiple boundaries at once. And if you do, reevaluate and adjust.
With that all being said, thank you for watching this episode today. To make sure you tune in next Tuesday and every Tuesday afterwards. We release brand new episodes here at Music Makers Cookbook on every podcast platform that you can listen to.
Yep.
If you haven't yet, please leave us a review. Let us know like what you think about what we got going on. It helps other people find our podcast. More artists become aware of the things that we're talking about, bring it top of mind, and make a living in music, which is something that we all want to do. There can never be a surplus of musicians making music and being able to support themselves financially through it. So please make sure you give us a review, leave us a 5-star review, leave a comment. On top of that, if there's anything you want us to cover in the future, any things that you're having problems with that you want us to talk about, message us at podcast@musicmakerscookbook.com and we will craft an episode around it to, talk about whatever it may be that you need help with. On top of that, if you want one-on-one coaching, you can contact me at swsrecordings.com. I do one-on-one coaching, which is basically this podcast, but specified towards your career and what you've got going on. I also do remote mixing and mastering for folk, rock, and acoustic music. So if that's something that you need as well, hit me up at swsrecordings.com. I'm on all the social media platforms at SWS Recordings. Brandon, how can they find you?
That's a great question, Sean. First of all, I want to say that you have a beautiful website and you should go check it out. If you're listening right now, swsrecordings.com. Now, anyways.
Thank you very much.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome. You're very welcome. You can find more information about me and my studio at studio222recording.com, or you can find me on all social media platforms at studio222recording or _Brandon McLeod. That's my personal one. Hit me up on either one. I do not care. Work on all sorts of different kind of stuff. So if you have anything related to audio in any way, shape, or form, just let me know. And I'd love to at least take a listen to it or learn more about it. Bless you, Sean. So yeah, that's where you can find me. Feel free to hit me up at any time. I'll try to get back to you as soon as humanly possible.
Yeah, if you want to work with an audio engineer who has worked with the Detroit Tigers, hit Brandon up.
Wow. What a plug. Thank you, Sean.
With that all being said, hopefully you grabbed a couple ingredients from the cabinet today that help you cook up your recipes for success. Thank you for tuning in, and from our kitchen to yours.